Coming up, it's Fan Take Friday, and the fans want to know what becomes of Killian Hayes if he can't make his way onto the court this preseason. How excited should we get on Ziaire Williams and the unfortunate tale of Dariq Whitehead in year number 2? We dive in coming up next.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, my friends, it is the Locked On Nets podcast right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team, the Brooklyn Nets, every single day. He's Doug Norrie. I'm Adam Armbrecht. We thank you, as always, for making us your first listen of the day. We're 100% free on all those great platforms and let you know that you can keep the NFL season going with big returns on FanDuel. Place your first $5 bet, and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com to get started today, Doug. And as we come live from our grandparents' houses, seemingly, we talk about the preseason game number 2, not until next Tuesday, but there are some narratives around 3 young players for Brooklyn that all seemingly are going potentially in different directions over the next handful of games.
How dare you talk about the curtains my wife put up in our shared office? I don't know where you are, but
I'm in my father's home, which is effectively a grandparent's home, so I feel okay with that. Whereas you, I assume, listen, you were out there at Nordstrom's and you just liked the pattern and you went with it. Good for you.
I don't make the style choices around here, buddy. I know where to keep my mouth shut and I know where to speak up, and those aren't the areas that I end up speaking up. And if you fans out there can't deal with the background, then you can't deal with it. Look, we got there's plenty to chew on from this first preseason game, which is cool, right? Like the Nets are in this time of crazy transition. I think we're going to see a season worth of things that look like they're maybe getting some traction and maybe some things that aren't, and maybe it's going to change over the course of the season. One thing I think that's awesome kind of about this year is, and probably frankly next year too, is that there's going to be a lot of guys who are playing for their NBA lives on this team. And the Nets could end up benefiting from that, where they just know this could be the last stop for some of these guys, right? Or crazy second chance opportunity or third chance opportunity for a guy, because that's the kind of player the Nets are planning on bringing in here over the next couple of years, along with a ton of draft picks. So we're going to see this combination of draft picks plus maybe some dudes on their second or third stop in the NBA that are looking to hang on. And that's going to make for guys standing out and us getting excited about a player who's just in a new situation. And I mean, from the Ziaire Williams standpoint, and we're hoping maybe for Killian Hayes too, this is for Williams, I think we for sure saw it in the first game. You saw hey, here's a window into why he was a high draft pick.
Yes.
Right. And maybe this is where it kind of ends up happening for him in Brooklyn.
And I actually think if we flip the script on which order we're going to go in here, Ziaire Williams, one, because we saw him in the preseason game. We did see Dariq Whitehead as well. We'll talk about him later, but because it looked good. Is your point, because it looked like, oh, right, this is why you were a high pedigree draft pick. And maybe, as he talked about being an uncaged bird after his time with the Grizzlies, he feels like he's in a real position here coming into this season, as we said all throughout this process, of veterans in front of you. Yeah, sure. But you are both in Ziaire Williams, not only still a young player, still a guy that maybe has a chance to turn his career trajectory around, but you're also a guy that has a lot of NBA experience and a lot of NBA minutes. And that's not the same for everybody, right? Like Noah Clowney is just coming into his first real season here. Dariq Whitehead, again, whole different story. Killian Hayes, yes, a lot of reps, but he's fallen so far off the NBA landscape in a lot of ways that he might as well be a rookie walking in the door here too. Likewise for Jalen Wilson, great summer league, but now it's about translating it into your next full season. So for Ziaire Williams, this feels like he's as close to the guy who maybe just situation and opportunity, coaching, whatever it may have been, something was just a couple degrees off where you could turn right back around and pivot this into a big return for him as far as where he stands in the NBA.
Yeah, well, these guys, the first thing I like to look for is like physicality wise, can they hang, right? And he clearly can, like physicality wise, size wise, speed wise. I think even in just a short period of time, right? I mean, we've seen him before with the Grizzlies, so no worries there. But then see him in a Nets uniform for the 23 minutes. He went 5 for 9 from the field, 10 points, really active. Like, we said, Ben Simmons caught him on a back cut once, and kind of away you go. That's just exactly what you want to see from the guy, right? You want to see like, okay, Can he stay on a basketball court in a switching scheme? For sure. Is he going to be active on the offensive end, even though we know there's going to be somewhat like limitations in his game, which we already sort of know where some of those are, like the shooting, right? That's never really come around 30% for his career from beyond the arc. That's just not going to be good enough for a full-time. That's just not good enough for a full-time wing player. Like that has to come around. You have to shoot. If you're going to play the 3 or the 4 in the NBA at this point, you have to be well above 30% from 3, or else you just can't, or you better be awesome at some other stuff, right? Like you better be so great on the ball, or, so great defensively. And even then it's close, right? So we are going to have to sit and wait to see if those other pieces come around. He didn't make any threes in this game. He only took 2, but I think overall, when you're looking at a guy, especially on this Nets team, who doesn't have to worry too much about being super optimized around winning, like he's just the kind of guy you want to see come in the door. Like it really is kind of like the perfect guy to come in the door, right? It is like this kind of activity, this kind of physicality.
No, and you talked about obviously some of the things that have worked well for him in that game. The shooting was there. Defensively, we talked about this on our last episode, just thinking about how some of the length plays when we look at the second unit coming in off the bench for the Brooklyn Nets, standing there at 6'9" or 6'8", 6'9", but having the wingspan over 6'10", obviously had 3 steals in the game. Like just having that length, if you're considered to be a player that can make an impact on that end first, that's going to play out really well no matter who you get paired with, which is the other nice thing looking inside the Nets front court right now. If you're talking about Noah Clowney being on the floor, if you're talking about it being Dorian Finney-Smith, Nicholas Claxton, Trendon Watford, like name any of the guys you want, it's always going to be beneficial to have someone that has his type of length and that you mentioned can play at least the physicality of it at the NBA level. Offensively, to me, this feels like the closest guy that, as you alluded to, if you can get the 3-point shooting to come around to enough respectability, then I start to think about him like a Dorian Finney-Smith replacement. If you're thinking about midway through the season, you move bodies out the door, this is the guy that you maybe keep behind someone else, or over the back half of the season, you can start to just expand his minutes because he's had those reps at the NBA level. Like that feels like the best case scenario for Brooklyn. You find a trade partner for Dorian Finney-Smith, and Ziaire Williams is ready to step into that larger role.
Yeah, and look, with DFS, you're talking about a 36% career 3-point shooter who like spiked it up to 40% at times in stretches where specifically we're like, oh God, trade him now. Right? Now it's not going to get better than this. This is crazy, because there was times last year where he was just shooting absolutely lights out from the field. Get that regression comes for us all, and it did for him. But still, 35% over his career, and has been able to play sort of some higher leverage playoff minutes, mostly because he was an active physical defender. Remember, like this is a guy that they've thrown at the 5 in a pinch. I think that's like a decent comp. If the shooting comes around. The problem is this is with all these guys. There's like the NBA is long with the list of players who had a ton of physical attributes, a ton of athleticism, and maybe in a different era, it would have looked a little different. The problem is now all the nerds won, and the 3-pointer is so important that now that if you can't do this thing that all the analytic geeks tell you is true, and by the way, it is true, you should be able to do it. It just really hampers you, and that's unfortunate. So it's just this one last piece that has to come around.
And of note, if you want to look back at Ziaire Williams, and obviously, right, the one piece that you can't just go 1-to-1 with DFS is the 3-point shooting. When he played more minutes, Williams, in his rookie year, averaging almost 22 minutes a night, he shot still just 31.4% from beyond the arc on 4 attempts per game. It dipped dramatically in year 2 when he was only averaging 15 points a game, only played in 37, only started 4. When it came back up this last year, again, over 30%. So there is something maybe to be said about the more consistent that his role is also maybe where that number can grow. And that could be interesting to see here, as he's going to be a bench guy, at least initially. If you see a solid 32-ish% from beyond the arc, then you can dream about that growing over the course of the season. Coming back here on the other side, Killian Hayes, the man we haven't seen yet in live game reps for Brooklyn. What is his outlook if he cannot find his way onto the preseason court? We get into that coming up next.
Before we get to that, tell you about our friends over at Game Time. We've been talking about Game Time forever. That's because it's easy to talk about. Look, if you're going to the game, you're going to the arena, the theater, the comedy show, the concert, whatever it is, you want your tickets to make sure you're getting a great deal. You want to see what you're going to see from the seat that you're going to sit down in. You want to have some protection on the back end too, in case something goes wrong. Check. Game Time Picks has you covered across the board. If you're in New York City, you're lucky enough to be in New York City. I mean, there's so much happening here that you can get on the action. Game Time, you get at Mets with the NLCS here, starting at $264. That's game 3. Looking ahead, maybe if they're able to advance, you have the ALDS with the Royals and the Yankees starting at $117. Stevie Wonder coming to town, $77 over there at MSG. It's all there for you over on Game Time, and obviously so much more. They got the curated deals, they have the super deals, they have those seat views, lowest price guarantee. It's all there on the Game Time app. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account. Use the code LOCKEDONNBA. You're going to get $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem the code LOCKEDONNBA. Get that $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game Time.
All right, so as we continue on today's Locked On Nets episode, talking about some of these young players with opportunity and which direction we think they can ultimately go. We talked about how no Killian Hayes already, saying that this is probably one of the players that cannot afford to not be healthy coming into the preseason right now, and an opportunity maybe to fill out a position of need for the Brooklyn Nets. It was mentioned over on Twitter here by Conqueror, asking if Killian Hayes would play for the Long Island Nets if he were to get waived. And it really, on a higher level, I thought it was just interesting to think about what would be next for Killian Hayes if it doesn't work out here in Brooklyn, because you can make the case that this is the best place to be if you are a player trying to reclimate his career. Team is tanking. They have a need at the position, and there's no reason not to give a longer look at a player like him as opposed to having a shorter leash. But is it overseas? Is it clean out of the NBA? Like, how much does this feel like last chance opportunity for Killian Hayes?
Well, he can't sign a 2-way contract to start.
That's correct.
Because,
not eligible for
because
that.
He's ineligible for that. So I think that pretty much takes it off the table here to some degree. Like, he has 3 years of NBA experience. So he can't be on the 2-way. It's funny for a guy that hasn't played with the Nets at all. We've talked a lot about Killian Hayes, but it makes sense because when you have a guy that comes in as such a high draft pick, at some point, there's always going to be belief, at least in some circles, that it can translate because you were drafted high for a reason. At some point, a group of NBA executives and scouts and stuff, and draft prognosticators saw Killian Hayes as coming in around this slot in the draft. Like, it wasn't totally crazy where the Pistons took him. Some people had him higher. They've taken L's on that. Like Hollinger has taken L on that. I think KOC took an L on that. Like, these guys I'm pretty sure were way higher on Killian Hayes coming in. Obviously it hasn't worked. But when you base it sort of on the dream originally, you end up giving the person, like, they get more chances, right? You just get more chances when you were this, like, sort of a version of a player that people thought you were going to be. So it's funny with Killian Hayes, like, we hear the name, we want it to work. We believe that whatever didn't work in Detroit could work here.
Mm-hmm.
We're basing it on kind of nothing, but it makes sense why you do it, because, like, at one time he was seen as this kind of guy. He started a ton of NBA games, and there's been times where he's flashed some of that ability. It just hasn't really translated to, like, full seasons and he just still, can't shoot the ball at all. I'm desperate for him to play. I really want him to play bad. I actually want him to play really well, because I think that these are just the kind of guys that I love that the Nets are taking chances on. But I'm just concerned that, like, there's a lot of things stacked against him right now in terms of, like, what they can't sign him to, how long he's been around the NBA, and stuff like that. So I think he's pushing the rock uphill a little bit here.
I was thinking about how, you said this yesterday when we were talking about Ben Simmons and the shame on us, for ever buying in ever for anything ever again. Like, why do we do it to ourselves when it comes to Ben Simmons? And I thought about this as, what if this was Detroit right now, and it was Killian Hayes still on the Detroit Pistons, and you were coming into a year like this, and it was the same conversation. Well, what if, he comes into preseason and he shows that he can get just a little bit of that shot can come around. We know he can facilitate all those things. I think that you'd hear, Koo from Locked On Pistons, who reached out to me on the side and was like, hey, what are you hearing about Killian Hayes? Because he wants it to work out for him as well. But I think if you then got the sample size, it might be that similar response of, boy, shame on us. Why do we keep buying into the idea that this player can become that thing? Now, Killian Hayes hasn't had the injuries that Ben Simmons has had, obviously. Killian Hayes has also never played to the level that Ben Simmons once upon a time played it at the NBA level either. But there was that little moment of, because I agree with you. I want him to be successful. He's the right age. He has some of the right skill set to be a great piece for the Nets to carry forward. And also, I wonder if he's healthy tomorrow and he's ready to play on Tuesday and he comes out and we go, oh, that's right, this guy can't shoot worth a lick. Like, if it'll just be that moment where we go, right, as if the Nets somehow are the only team that had an eye on him. Now, again, we've seen this with other players where it has worked out, but the shooting part, the shooting piece of it is something that does seem to be very hard to evolve out of, although maybe mechanics and technique and coaching can get him there. Certainly a more difficult task if you're not even healthy enough to be on the court.
Yeah, I mean, you thought the Ziaire Williams thing was bad. I mean, this guy he's a guard, and he shot 28% for his, I'm rounding up, by the way, 28% for his career from three as a guard. It's just, you can't play in the NBA.
You think you can't play, you
think you can't play in the NBA at that kind of shooting from the 3 and the 4? I put a guy at guard and tell him, and tell me how long they're going to last when you simply can't shoot. It just doesn't, again, the math simply doesn't work. Like, you can't, there just aren't enough ways to really kind of get it going unless you're incredible in other spots. He's not. So you just have to have this other thing come around. And sometimes we say it a lot. It's like, basketball is really, really complex, and it's also super simple, right? It's super complex because the people that operate at the highest levels of this are running schemes that you're just not able to fully, you need actually tape bros to go back and tell you sort of what was happening, right? Like, they need to spend hours cutting the tape, going down basically frame by frame to show you what was happening in the real moment, because most people can't digest in a real time sort of level what's happening on a micro level in a basketball game. And also, if the ball doesn't go in the basket, then there's not really much analysis that we need to do. Right? Like, if the ball,
when you're shooting 28% from beyond the arc over a large sample size, it does.
If the ball just doesn't go in, there's no tape in the world that's going to tell you a different story. And so,
they covered the basket when he shot. Well, that's different then. They covered up the basket. That wasn't fair.
Yeah. So, that's what I mean about it's like simple and it's complex. It's both things at the same time. But for some people, it's just a little more simple than others. And Killian Hayes represents that. If he's going to shoot 28%, then he's not going to make the team. And there's just really not a lot of places for him in the NBA. If he can get that up, or if he can show sort of, massive skills on around just ball distribution and, lane penetration and just get after it defensively, maybe. But he's just got to come in and shoot well. And I hate to have that be the whole story, but that's kind of it.
And let's be honest, too, when we talk about this backcourt, like, there's another later first round pick in Keon Johnson, who, like, fans have seen and we talked about, and everyone wants him to maybe be able to succeed here. He shot 5 of 13 in 21 minutes, only 2 of 8 from beyond the arc, by the way. So good percentages for comps there if we're talking about Killian Hayes. But he also had 6 rebounds. He also had 4 assists. Like, part of this could end up being for the Brooklyn Nets. Like, hey, we were willing to take a flyer on this guy because of his pedigree. But we are also taking flyers on a lot of guys inside of that backcourt guard kind of room. And again, if you're not on the court to show us something that is going well or that looks like it could be different for you, how can we do anything else other than maybe elevate guys who are at least putting some solid film on tape? So that's a part of this too. It's just, you need the sample to be able to convince yourself that it's worth holding on to a player like that over someone else. Coming up here in a second, another player that's going to be held on to, but certainly has seen his trajectory go the opposite direction of someone like Noah Clowney, and that's Dariq Whitehead. Had some minutes. I don't know what to make of this other than a really unfortunate story for a player that we were excited to take a look at coming out of the draft. We'll close out on him coming up next.
All right, before we get that, tell you about our friends over at FanDuel. NFL fans, get going with this season. Big return over on FanDuel. That's America's #1 sports book. There's so many different things you can bet on FanDuel. If I started listing them all right now, we would blow through. I mean, it'd be like 2 hours.
Start with one and then just work your way through.
One, player props over on Jamar Chase. This is where it goes. I'm telling you right now, they've dissected this thing every which way. It makes it awesome for NFL Sunday. You're over on the FanDuel app. You can get the live game betting going. You can get the player props if you got a hunch before the game. Maybe you kind of, your team. You're gonna I know better this a little bit. You know what the players are gonna perform for the team you root for. Get over on FanDuel and show them that you can. You can get started on FanDuel. $200 in bonus bets with just with your first $5 real money bet. So it's $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. You got to place a first $5 real money bet over on FanDuel.com, America's #1 sportsbook.
All right, so as we close out today's Locked On Nets episode, Fan Take Friday, that came in from Conqueror. We got one from Iceman, the Eskimo coming in as well. So always, as we post this up over on social and over on YouTube as well, check it out and give your thoughts. They can be immediate about the next upcoming game or high-level things. We talk about the trade deadline or even future draft classes. So be a part of that with the Locked On Nets community. Dariq Whitehead, I got to tell you, when we mentioned Killian Hayes and the injury and it being difficult to get a sample size, this might be the other way. We keep getting sample sizes and it keeps being difficult to see this path for Dariq Whitehead. Now, the good thing for him is there's no expectation or pressure for him right now. The bad side, maybe, do you think there's a world where the Nets are getting closer to, hey, we took a dart throw and that dart throw is missed, and maybe he's for some other team to take a look at and see if they can reclaim that value? When do you think that turning point might be for Dariq Whitehead?
I mean, probably years. He's so young that I think
Yeah.
he's still just turned 20 years old. And I think that's, if you're hanging your hat on anything with Dariq Whitehead right now, it's that he was a top prospect in high school and has dealt with some injuries. Some of those injuries are going to affect conditioning because it's your foot, and that's going to be a problem. It's going to be a problem to like really condition really well when you have multiple foot surgeries over the years. It's just going to be hard to get all the way back to like peak athleticism in a short period of time. If you're telling the positive version of the Dariq Whitehead story, like that's what you say. It's like, hey, this could take years. Luckily, for his age, he has years.
Yeah.
He's so young to just turn 20, a year out of the draft. That is as young as it gets at this point. And so I think like that's the positive spin on it. That's kind of the only positive spin you can put on it, because the on the court stuff has just not looked very good. There's just no other way to dissect it. The summer league looked not good. This first preseason game did not look very good. But I'm not like throwing the towel on him or anything like that. This is not, we're years away. I think we're years away from that. Like a whole, I doubt he cracks too much of the rotation, if any, this year. I think he's in Long Island. I think they're building him back up. The hope is in Long Island, he has some games where he really balls out and shows. Because remember, when you're in the G League, you have to kind of crush the G League if you're going to make it on the NBA level. Right, you cannot just be doing fine at the G League. It's like Summer League. It's like you need to crush Summer League. Guys that are going to be good in the NBA smoke Summer League, usually. And especially guys that are sort of like wing creator types, which he kind of is, have to really be taking advantage of the lesser talent at those levels in a big eye-popping way. Even that is not the best one-to-one translation of who's going to be great in the NBA. Because remember, I mean, the talent drop-off from the NBA to the G League is massive. And so you have to kind of crush. So I think what we need to see from him this year is flashes of like smoking the G League. If he's not doing that, I will, by the end of the year, let's say, I would have really pretty major concerns probably. But I do think that I'm not going to make that I don't think we're going to make that determination here in October, right? I think that this is let's take a look at, like in April, kind of what happened.
What I will say is I definitely was willing to get overexcited about him in Summer League, like entering into that and thinking, okay, we know the injuries, but now we can show a little something here and we'll start to see X. And that went so much the wrong way. And to your point, I want to put a lot of it on just the physicality of it and coming back from the foot injury and that just needing so much more time that my timeline now goes, okay, let's talk next Summer League, right? Like, and after what should be a successful G League, as you mentioned, showing those flashes, and then we'll see what he looks like in Summer League. And does he maybe have a Jalen Wilson type showing next year where you start to think about him being a part of the NBA rotation? But to that end, Killian Hayes, Ziaire Williams, Dariq Whitehead, like these are all guys that have gone through or are going through a similar type of NBA journey when it comes to talent, the hype or expectations around them, and then getting the results. And guess what? There's a lot of players that go through this because that's how difficult it is to be that good at the NBA level. And I think it's something that often goes kind of unnoticed or unrecognized, that there are dozens of stories like this every single offseason where players keep trying and keep grinding and you get flushed out You get flushed out because the next wave of talent comes in, and now the rookie class is here, and they look better and they look stronger, and teams want to take flyers or maintain their looks on those guys rather than running a re-risk on some of these talents. That's the benefit, as we keep saying, Brooklyn has in a tank year. Well, we can take a little bit look back on some of these guys and not worry about hurting our overall outlook.
Yeah, and that's just going to be the theme. Like we said at the beginning, this is the theme over the next couple of years. The theme over the next couple of years is taking flyers, seeing who works out. Some of them are going to, some of them are not going to. It's just the sort of the law of like whatever the law of the universe here is. It's just not all going to work, but there are going to be guys that the Nets kind of
the law of averages says one or two of these guys will hit for Brooklyn as well, right? Like in
you would think so based on the pedigree. Like you would think so just based simply on the pedigree that like that would be the case. Maybe not, but it stands to, I think it's a good logical assumption that the Nets are going to end up getting there. Okay. We're going to get out of here. Look, we got a full week next week. Nets play another preseason game. We'll get a little more injury news around what's going on around some of these guys. And maybe we're going to be able to see them against the Wizards or not. We're going to have, like, look, real close look at the tank off that's going to happen here between the Wizards and the Nets. Last man standing loses. You want to be the first man gone in this situation. We want the Nets, all the L's, baby, all the time.
Phantom blow. Hit the mat. Go to the mat.
We didn't make the rules around the tanking, folks. Look, I get it. The draft thing is stupid. I wish there was any other rules that governed how the work. I wish they did it like EPL or whatever else where you get relegated. I wish we had 500 NBA teams where you could just kind of move up and down into the different leagues and the different standings. That's that's the coolest version of professional sports. So soccer got it right, or football, whatever you lamos want to call it, got it right over in Europe and elsewhere. The NBA screwed it up with this silly rule, but we live within the rules, buddy. You know us, and we're gonna root for the tank. That's how it goes. We're gonna get out of here. Make sure you subscribe over to Locked On Nets wherever you listen to the podcast. Make sure you subscribe to YouTube as well. Get us to 8,000 subscribers. Like I said, Nets not holding up their end of the winning deal. We're going to hold up our end of the winning podcast deal 5 days a week. Talking Brooklyn Nets.
This guy's crushing it over here. It's a Fan Take Friday. Listen, just because a man lacks the use of his eyes doesn't mean he lacks vision. And that is Stephen Wonder.
One of the all-time great poets. Not dead, by the way. How do I know?
Living.
Come in the concert. Come in the concert over at MSG. That's how we know. One of the all-time great poets. We're back again next week talking more Brooklyn Nets basketball.